All right, can you all see? All right, so thank y'all very much for being here today. My name is Reese Bradley. I am the Elementary Social Studies Education Associate in the Office of Assessment and Standards. For me, that means I handle kindergarten through fifth grade, and I'm really excited that y'all are here with me today. I'll now turn it over to my co-pilot to introduce herself. She'll be dropping some links in the chat for us.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Felicia Roberson. I am the secondary ELA associate with the State Department and working closely with social studies. I'm so happy to help Reese. Thank you for asking.
So just to set some norms really quickly, this is the bar that you should have at the top of your screen. We have the chat feature, which we'll be using throughout this presentation. You'll just click that button and a window will pop up on the side where you can type and enter. We have the raise your hand feature, so if you need to speak, you can raise your hand. Reactions, which we're not really going to be using today, but if you want to send a heart or clapping hands, you're more than welcome to do that. Always encourage participation. And then we also have your camera and microphone buttons, which I see that y'all have figured out already since we have already said hello. So just to get started, I always like to begin with the profile of the South Carolina graduate. This is something that y'all are probably familiar with already, and it's something that's kind of the cornerstone for everything we're doing K-12 and preparing our students to be college and career ready. So if you could come off mute or drop in the chat where you see social studies in this profile, that would be great. I'm looking for one example before we move on.
Reese, when I look at the life and career characteristics where it talks about a global perspective, that would be one of the things that I think is a strong alignment to social studies.
Yes, so global perspective is a big one. And we also have social sciences here under world-class knowledge, and also all the different things that we're doing in our classroom promote, that creativity, critical thinking, problem solving, and communication. So really all of these things fall under the social studies umbrella, or the social studies falls under all of these things as well. So to get started, Felicia is going to drop a link in the chat for you. And what it's going to do is it's going to pull up a slideshow, and I want you to fill in sticky notes on all 3 slides, answering the questions on those slides. Thank you, Felicia.
You're welcome.
All right, so I'm seeing some answers come in, talking about comparing 2 or more items and ideas, commonalities and differences. So you talk about comparing skills in different grade levels and how they progress. Planning now and comparing prices. Yeah, so planning vacations, that's a great one. Right, and comparing texts on the same topic, which is also a really great way to kind of have some of that ELA integration as well. All right, so we're going to go ahead and move on. Thank y'all so much for doing that and dropping all that in the slideshow. So we're going to come back together now. So the reason that I wanted to start with comparison today is the first of the skills that we're kind of doing a deep dive on is because when people think about comparison and comparative thinking, they often think about it in these formats, right? And while those are great organizers for comparing and contrasting, I really want us to start thinking outside the box with our students and the connections that we make. Throw them examples of alike in different perspectives and places that go beyond surface level and make them think more deeply. So really, alike and different is just the tip of the iceberg. Comparison is all of the connections we make, and we're going to see how that starts connecting to other skills momentarily. So on your screen, you will see the progression of all of our historical thinking skills across K-12. Comparison is highlighted in yellow at the top. What do you notice about the skill of comparison on this chart? Maybe compared to yeah, so there's a lot of overlap. And it's also one of the earliest skills that we have, right? It starts in the very beginning here in kindergarten, where we don't have things like contextualization or periodization. So comparison serves as the base of pattern recognition, which is the basis for many of these other historical thinking skills we have, and even some of our geographic skills that we have in 3rd and 7th grade for that matter. And for example, same and different can translate into continuity and change, right? Or cause and effect. You have to notice that there is something different, that there has been a change in order to then be able to identify what that change is. So we have a progression within each skill, but then we also sort of have a progression of skills as well, which is why we see our skills here organized in this way. So comparison is in many ways the base of other skills that come later, and that is why we are starting with comparison. So on your screen, you're going to see 4 photos. In the chat, you can kind of talk amongst yourselves, but in the chat, I'd like you to send the letter of which one you think does not belong and why. A, because it's not motorized. It's a good answer. D, because it's not ground transportation. My vote's going to be A because it doesn't have wheels. Right? So there is no right or wrong. So what kinds of things were standing out to you in those photos? So obviously we saw wheels, you were looking at the types of vehicles, you were looking at and using your background information about the things you're seeing in these images, about how they work, like mechanically. So comparison begins with the noticing of traits, and it's the identification of those small things that is really the base of everything in elementary. The reasons or justifications that you listed are explanations of those traits that you noticed, which is really sort of a second step. So initially here today, we're really going to be focusing on that identification piece, because that identification piece is also what's going to translate into those other skills later outside of just alike and different. So these are our skill progression for comparison in K through 2. So if you would drop in the chat, what traits might you teach students to compare if you were teaching one of these standards? And this is from Appendix A in our standards document as well. I find sometimes people don't realize we have a progression for K2, but that is in the back of our standards document. Color, size, shape, number. Yes. So some physical characteristics. Do you notice anything about the progression of what we're asking students to compare? Is it how close it is to them, right? Community characteristics between mine and others. See somebody typing, so I'm gonna let them get their answer and continue. Thank y'all so much for being such active, engaged participants, by the way. I really appreciate it.
And Reese, the thing I was just noticing is moving from self to community, the lens just zooms out further and further as you go from K to
Exactly.
2.
Exactly. So it's actually great. That's what I was going to point out as we start with the student themselves and slowly expand that lens out. And so it's really foundational to start with things that students can relate to with themselves as we move out. And then that's going to allow you to start making more and more complex comparisons. So we get into, you know, 3rd grade geography when you're comparing different places and different traditions, and then getting into 4th and 5th grade with that US history component and comparing different perspectives as well. So really quickly, some examples. These are some things that you may have noted. Things like hair color, eyes, your hometown, your background, pets you have, and your favorite things. Communities, things like size, types of places and sites. What does it look like? Types of transportation that are common there. What kind of jobs do people have? What is the environment like? So some of those physical characteristics of place. And then for events, when you're looking at 2nd grade, looking at things like time period, where, your location, people or groups that are involved, causes and effects, and environment. So again, starting to pick out those very small characteristics and really just identifying all of the little pieces. So this is from our historical thinking skills progression document on the social studies instructional resources page. Felicia is going to send a link to a handout here in just a minute so that you can have some additional information that we're not going to delve into too deeply today. There are some things that we're going to discuss. There's just some additional information in that handout if you want to make a copy. Before we move, I would like to ask what you notice about the first column that is different than about the second column. And in that, I'm talking specifically about that content.
First column is just being able to pick it out and identify. Second column is being able to explain in more detail.
Yes, exactly. So we have noticing to describing. Yes, so from identifying to describing. So here are some different sentence stems and what that might look like on a really basic level in your classroom. And it is that basic identification component, as Amanda has said. And then when you start looking at describing, that starts to increase in complexity, and you begin assigning meaning to what you have identified using evidence. So let me, oh, here's your sentence stems for that. So the second level has sentence stems that are similar, and they incorporate evidence and start to characterize things we identify by assigning further meaning to those traits than were identified before. So it's more than I just can tell this, it's I can tell this because. And I will say that noticing, while that seems very, very simple, when you start looking at primary sources and text, identifying people's perspectives can sometimes be tricky. So again, that's starting to learn skills, not just of pointing at physical traits or very obvious points, but also starting to discern those more nuanced pieces. So we also have characteristics which apply to places and events. Up until this point, you'll have heard me repeatedly say traits. And then we have perspectives which apply specifically to people and groups. Traits are things about places, events, artifacts, and environments. And I specifically wanted to include this slide because perspectives are things that are shaped by experiences, roles, identities, needs, and goals that apply to those peoples and groups. So there's a little bit more to those sometimes than when you're looking at your places and your events. So just to look at some other examples of how we can use comparison, you can use a variety of different formats. I personally like using audio formats, especially with younger learners, because sometimes I find it's a little bit easier to connect to. So if y'all will give me a thumbs up if you can hear the audio when I start it. If we have some technical issues, then I'll send some transcripts of what these songs are in the chat for you.
We are coming, Father Abram, 300,000 more from Mississippi's winding stream and from New England's shore. We leave our plows and workshops, our wives and children dear, with hearts too full for utterance and but a silent tear. We are coming, our union to restore. We are coming, Father Abram, with 300,000 more.
Okay, so what were some things that you heard in that you could pull out specifically? If you heard any terms or any things in that you could pull out that might show perspective. And I can actually still drop that transcription in the chat for you if that will be helpful as well. Grab it and come right back. You know, what makes them share a desire, coming from across the country. So we have regions that people are from, coming to restore union. So it's what people are fighting for. Yes, so I see, and Amanda's throwing that in the chat, so great. So now we're going to listen to the second clip, and we're going to do the same thing with that. If it will play, please. There it goes.
We are a band of brothers and native to the soil,
Oh no.
fighting for our liberty with
Every time I click is
treasure, blood, and toil. And when our rights were threatened, the cry rose near and far. Hurrah for the bonny blue flag that bears a single star. Hurrah, hurrah for Southern rights, hurrah. Hurrah for the bonny blue flag that bears a single star.
okay. So what did you hear in that one that might have stood out to show a perspective? And I'm going to drop the transcription for that in as well. I just got to grab it from another window. It did not like me doing that while I was trying to play the audio at all. Fight for honest land. Heard some stuff in there about states' rights. We didn't quite get to the part about northern treachery, but that's in there too. It's pretty strong language, right? So these show two very different perspectives on the same conflict. So this is one of many ways that we can bring different kinds of media in for our students to allow them to identify those characteristics and traits in a different way and connect their learning. So obviously you could connect this if you're a fourth grade teacher to some of the teachings about the Civil War and the different perspectives and the reasons for it. Yeah. So there's a variety of ways to do this. These recordings, if you're interested in using them yourself, actually came from, I think it was the Kennedy Center, had these up and uploaded where they had done a whole project on recreating music from that time period. And the Library of Congress has something called the National Jukebox, and there's a lot of really great audio files on there as well if you're interested in using comparison. In a later presentation, to give you a sneak peek, if you're coming to Continuity and Change, we actually use some stuff from there to show the difference in music from 1900 up through the Roaring 20s to actually show that change. All right, so now we're going to use a technique called the 4 quarters technique, and we're actually going to explore some art from the Revolutionary period. So if you could drop in the chat or come off mute and say what you notice in this piece of the picture. Regal clothing. Think it's somebody wealthy or powerful. Time period architecture from the column. Yeah. So I see some really fancy buttons and a coat that I definitely couldn't wear in South Carolina. Right. It's giving wealthy. Why is it giving wealthy? Fancy bows and adornment. The gold. Right. So now we're going to look at the next half. We're going to do the same thing. An ornate design. I noticed this guy's hair here. I don't think I know anybody that has hair that looks quite like that now, so maybe it's from a long time ago. And it looks like there's some fancy columns again in the back. It's a really big room. Right. So again, we see fancy furniture. We see some fur, older style of clothing. What do we notice right here in the top right? Clothing, we see a crown, right? And now we're going to go to our last quarter. We can see a name and a date, right? So we now know this is a picture of George III, and it was painted in 1767. So now that we have the image as a whole, what can you gather about the person from this painting? We've kind of talked about it a little bit. How does it make you feel? And how does the person who created this kind of feel about the subject of this painting? If you had to guess. So we know that he's royal, right? Are there any details we might have missed if we hadn't gone through it quarter by quarter really closely? First time I looked at this, I didn't see the crown. Yeah, it's an official portrait. So it's kind of, it's respectful, right? Y'all had said he's very regal looking. So obviously there's a lot of respect for this person in power. Ah, Melanie, so you do this political cartoons? We're doing that too. All right, so we're gonna go through this really quickly again, and we're gonna see what we notice in each of the quarters before we pull them all together. I see a tail of something. And I see the same pattern that I saw on the coat in the other one, even though I'm not supposed to be comparing yet. Looks like a horse. All right, go to our next quarter. I don't think he looks like he's having a good time. He's kind of scared. Looks like he's running away. We notice all kinds of weird weapons like bayonets and some little rapiers and things. He's being attacked. Okay. There's your horse, Bill. Have somebody in the background running with a flag, throwing his master, and then Horse America. We pull the whole thing together. Now, how do we think the person feels about the subject of this piece of art? Do we think they like that person very much? No. Yeah, the words do help. They want a liberation. So now, when we look at these two things side by side, it becomes very clear that they had different feelings about the same person. This is where we can explain to our students they are about the same person, and we can connect this back to the content that we're teaching in our course with the American Revolution, right? So it's another way to sort of get into perspective and compare ideas without having to pull it directly from a text or to just tell them. You can give them something else to visually sort of latch onto. And I'll also add that that 4-quadrant strategy that we just used is great for image analysis, especially in images that have a lot of detail. It helps students focus and it helps ensure that they're not going to miss important details by their focus being drawn elsewhere. So now we're going to explore comparison, and Felicia is going to be, oh, thank you, Melanie. Yes, and thank you, Stacy. So Felicia's going to drop a link in the chat, and it's going to be a link to a Google Slides. Originally, we were going to go into breakout rooms, but since there are 4 of us here, I think we're just going to stay in this room if everybody's comfortable with that, and we can kind of talk and work through the examples and the slides. I wanted you to have a little bit of choice in looking at different types of comparison and different types of sources you can use, as well as the different traits and characteristics that you can pull out. I will say the graphic organizers that are in there are not necessarily for use with students, but it's just for sort of organizing our thinking today and looking at the difference between those 2 steps and what we're actually expecting of students at those different levels. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now so that I can see y'all a little bit better. And if y'all can let me know when you get in. Yes, okay. Bill's saying, I think he did the geography one, looking at places, so the income's different in the population. I'm going to pull mine up so I can look at it with y'all. Geography, socioeconomics. So when you're saying geography on that first one, Mr. Carden, are you talking about like physically what the place is like? So one being more inland and one being beach?
It's
Or
physical
coastal?
location along with its topography.
Yeah. Obviously, if we're doing this with students, the resources we're going to give them are going to be pre-curated. I just wanted to provide examples of where you can pull some of this if you're not super familiar with it. The census data website actually has a lot of really great information if you move to a new district or you're somewhere where you're not as familiar with that area to pull some of those characteristics out. All right, so we've kind of talked about some of the things we noticed with geography, and the different viewpoints in the letters. So we saw different kinds of sources being used. We saw primary sources, we saw secondary sources, and we also kind of saw pulling in some of those geography skills as well. So we're gonna go ahead and move along. And this is the fun stuff, some games and things you can do in your classroom. So this is another activity or group of activities that you can do by creating your own set of stimulus cards. And on the cards, you can include the following. So people's, groups, places, events, traits, characteristics, so all those different things that we've sort of talked about today. And I am a big proponent of, if I'm going to create something to use in a classroom, I would like to be able to use it for multiple things, because it is sort of a time sink creating those resources. So I'm actually going to talk about 4 different ways that you can use these cards today. So the first would be a matching or sorting game. And when I say you make the set of cards, sometimes I would put pictures of people, so you've got some visual sources and things in there as well. You can put primary sources, so if you're talking about like the Boston Massacre, putting the etching of that on the card. So you can kind of mix it up so it's not just text-based. But then when you're doing a matching or sorting game, you can have students making connections between the card subjects, so randomly drawing them, or sorting them into piles and giving students topics for those piles to sort of help them make those connections. And then discussing maybe why they chose to sort things in the way that they did. Another is the chain game, which you make by distributing cards. You would give a card out to each student in the class and then put a prompt up on the board or draw your own card. And then you would say to the prompt, you know, this is the same or different because, and the next person would say, well, this is the same or different because, on and on and on, to make those different kinds of connections. Because I find it's really easy sometimes to find where things are the same, but sometimes we miss where things are different because it may not always be obvious, and we think that that's explicit for our students and it's not always obvious for them. So sometimes calling those things out can help. Crazy comparisons, they will draw 2 cards randomly, and there will be a card in the middle, and then they will have to put down a card on top and say whether it's the same or different and make a comparison. If you want to track that, you can also create a graphic organizer that goes with it, where they can write things in as they go. And then this or that, where you have 2 piles of cards face up. They draw a card into their hands and decide which of the cards on the table is most like or most different than their card. So again, making some of those comparisons. And all of these activities are designed to stretch our students' brains, so it's not going to be easy. So you can kind of scaffold that level of difficulty or mess with that level of difficulty based on the traits and the contents of the cards that you create. And I think that this is probably best at the end for review if you're coming to the end of a unit, but it allows them time to talk and reason through their answers as well, which can be really beneficial. So this is that same thinking skills progression document that we looked at earlier, and this is the full progression from 4th grade through U.S. history and Constitution. So I wanted to take a moment and just look at how those expectations for comparison change from elementary to high school. And I find it's really important to look at the entire spectrum when we're talking about elementary education, because what we're doing is the foundation, right? We're laying the foundation for everything that's going to come later. So it's important to know what we're building toward to make sure that we're building that foundation effectively. So what do you notice about those expectations as we get up into 8th grade in U.S. history and Constitution? You can come off mute, you can send it in the chat. Increased rigor. Creation, yeah, so when we get to usage, we're creating something entirely new from evidence. And we're also beginning to pull more things in, right? It's not just 2 things or 3 things that we're comparing. That pool that we're pulling from starts getting a lot bigger. So now I want to take a few minutes and sort of look at how comparison, as we talked about earlier, is the base for other skills. Felicia is going to be dropping a link in the chat, and I'm going to unshare my screen so that we can all sort of talk through this together. And it's got the 4th and 5th grade skill expectations for all 6 of our historical thinking skills on there, and I want to walk through together and actually see if we can identify where we see some of these elements of comparison in other skills. It's going to be a forced copy, and the reason that I've got it as a forced copy so you can mark it up. You can highlight, you can add comments, whatever way works best for you. I'm gonna pull mine up. All right, so if we want, do y'all want to just do this together? We can start with causation. And so if you'll go to the causation slide in that slide deck. Where do you see some element of comparison here if you see one? If you
When
don't see one,
students have to compare like multiple causes of an event.
yeah, so finding out why. And obviously with causation, like I said, there's cause and effect, so you do have a change and what triggered that change, so you have to be able to tell something is different. I think we also see that with the short and long-term effects, right? So we have to know the difference between be able to gauge or compare impacts over time. So small things, but still that very basic element of comparison is there. Yeah, fourth grade always seems to be more of the what, and fifth grade seems to get more into the why. Exactly. And that is the trend that we continue to see as we go up, as y'all noted just a minute ago, where we really start to increase in depth. So we'll go on to contextualization now. That is a great point. So things like the date when something was created, the place where it was created, who created it. Those are traits or characteristics of that source. Right? So when we start looking at sources and pulling those things out, again, that's that identification component. But then when we start making connections, there's also sort of an element of comparison there, potentially when you're looking at how things blend into each other. Moving along. Periodization is kind of similar to what we just talked about with contextualization. Continuity and change. Oh, sorry, Dr. McLemore. Historic to current events. Yeah, so comparing things that happened a long time ago to now. One thing I particularly want to point out with continuity and change is the identification of patterns and recurrent patterns. Because, yes, summarizing is a challenge to start with, yes. Identifying all those elements and putting them together. And continuity and change, I like to think of as comparison plus time. So it's sort of the fusion of those two things together over a period when you start identifying those patterns over time. It's comparing this to this to this to this to this. And of course, the last is evidence. And we kind of hit on this when we're talking about contextualization with who created a source, where it was created. Again, it's the identification and pulling out of those elements and then generating questions and starting to add meaning to what you're pulling out. I'm going to reshare my screen if I can find the button. is all right, so now we're going to go into a quick reflection activity. So if Felicia can drop the Know, Wonder, Learn link in the chat. Thank you. She's already on it. Look at her go. She's ahead of me. And what you'll do is you go to a slide and just fill it out the same way that we did those sticky notes earlier. Just really quickly. Y'all can give me a thumbs up when you're good. I don't want to rush anybody. We have time, but if we're done, I also want to be respectful of your time. And I was looking at some of the comments. I saw several things about ELA. I'm going to put a shameless plug in here. I currently have an elementary needs assessment out for elementary teachers. If you filled that out already, thank you. I'm dropping the link right here. Felicia, I didn't give you this one, so it's not on you. If you'd like to fill that out, I would really appreciate your input. Thank y'all so much for being here. I'm going to share my slides one more time. All right, so congratulations. We get 1 hour of research credit. You have made it through the presentation. I'm now going to stop the recording. So thank y'all again for being here.